For a full billion years, our planet was stuck. Geologically, climatically, and most importantly, biologically, Earth was in a state of suspended animation. This immense stretch of time, from about 1.8 to 0.8 billion years ago, has been nicknamed the boring billion. But was it truly boring? Or was it a period of immense, coiled potential, just waiting for the world to break? Today, we're going to explore how the cataclysmic death of an ancient supercontinent ended this planetary stasis and forged the cradles for all complex life, including us. Imagine an Earth you wouldn't recognize. A single, colossal landmass, a supercontinent called Nuna, dominated one side of the globe. It was a planetary jigsaw puzzle, locking together the ancient cores of what would become North America, Europe, Siberia, Australia, India, and China. This geological monolith created a world with a surprisingly short global coastline and vast, brutally arid interiors, all baking under a sun that was less fierce than our own. The oceans were just as alien. While the surface might have held some oxygen, the deeps were a toxic brew, largely anoxic, meaning without oxygen, and often euxinic, which means they were rich in poisonous hydrogen sulfide. The atmosphere itself was thin on what matters most to us. Oxygen levels were maybe 1%, perhaps as low as 0.1%, of what we breathe today. This oxygen scarcity placed a fundamental limit on the energy available to life. And life itself, though it had existed for over 1 billion years, seemed to be going nowhere fast. The stars of the show were prokaryotes, simple, single-celled organisms like bacteria, the ancestors of eukaryotes, the more complex cell type that all animals, plants, and fungi are made from, had likely already appeared. But they were backstage, minor players in a world where they couldn't compete. The fossil record from this period shows a striking lack of innovation. Life was seemingly stuck in a microbial swamp, unable to make the great leap toward complexity. Why? It's believed the planet's very stability was the problem. The monolithic nature of Nuna meant less tectonic activity, less volcanism, and crucially, a limited supply of essential nutrients, like phosphorus washing into the oceans. Life was in a holding pattern, waiting for the world to change. And change it did. Deep within Earth's mantle, the engine of planetary change never truly sleeps. Plumes of intensely hot rock, like giant thermal blowtorches, began to rise and press against the underbelly of Nuna. After hundreds of millions of years of quiet, the supercontinent began to stir. The immense stress started to stretch and weaken the crust. Cracks appeared, deepened, and became vast rift valleys. This was the beginning of the end for Nuna, a slow-motion cataclysm we now call the Nuna Anomaly, which unfolded over 200 million years. Using paleomagnetism, the study of ancient magnetic signatures locked in rocks, scientists have pieced together the timeline of this planetary divorce. It wasn't one clean break, but a stepwise fragmentation that happened in 3 major acts. The first act began around 1.38 billion years ago. A huge chunk, dubbed East Nuna, which included Proto-Australia and North China, started to tear away from the main continental core. This was an explosive process. As the crust thinned, massive volumes of magma erupted onto the surface, creating what are known as large igneous provinces, vast fields of volcanic rock that serve as geological fingerprints of a continent's separation. Act 2 came shortly after, around 1.32 billion years ago. The newly formed East Nuna didn't stay together for long. It too began to fracture, with Australia and North China starting to drift apart, each breakup marked by its own immense volcanic activity. The final act in this grand tectonic drama, from about 1.26 to 1.22 billion years ago, was the rupture of Nuna's core. The ancient heart of northern Europe, known as Baltica, finally detached from the conjoined landmass of Laurentia and Siberia. The supercontinent Nuna was no more. This massive geological reorganization wasn't just about redrawing the world map. It was a complete overhaul of Earth's environmental systems. It triggered a cascade of changes in the oceans, atmosphere, and climate, and it was this cascade that finally broke the evolutionary deadlock of the boring billion. The breakup of Nuna was the planetary scale event that life had been waiting for. It didn't just create new continents. It created new worlds of opportunity. This transformation happened through a trio of interconnected geological processes. First, the birth of shallow seas. As the fragments of Nuna drifted apart, the world's geography was revolutionized. The tearing of the plates created new coastlines on an unprecedented scale. More importantly, as these new continental edges cooled and subsided, they formed extensive, shallow continental shelves. Recent models estimate that as Nuna fragmented, the total length of these shallow sea environments more than doubled, reaching around 130,000 kilometers. That's long enough to wrap around the Earth's equator more than 3 times. These burgeoning shallow seas were the ecological incubators that had been missing for 1 billion years. Unlike the dark, toxic deep oceans, these sunlit coastal waters were primed for life. Sunlight could penetrate to the sea floor, providing energy for photosynthesis. The constant interaction with the atmosphere and rivers meant these waters were more likely to be oxygenated and temperate. They offered stable, resource-rich environments, a stark contrast to the nutrient-starved oceans that had dominated the planet. It was in these sprawling nurseries that early complex life could finally gain a foothold. Second, the supermountain effect. The immense tectonic forces that both stitched Nuna together and later tore it apart also crumpled the crust, thrusting up some of the most colossal mountain ranges in Earth's history. One such range, the Nuna supermountain, is thought to have stretched for over 8,000 kilometers, with peaks potentially higher than the modern Himalayas. But the destruction of these giants was just as important as their creation. As soon as these mountains were uplifted, they were attacked by erosion. Wind and rain chipped away at the rock, grinding it down over millions of years. This process unleashed an extraordinary gift, a massive pulse of sediment and, crucially, life-sustaining nutrients that had been locked away in the rock. The most important of these was phosphorus. Phosphorus is a critical building block of DNA, RNA, and the ATP molecule that powers our cells. Its scarcity during the boring billion is considered a primary reason for the evolutionary stagnation. The erosion of the Nuna supermountains washed enormous quantities of phosphorus and other key minerals into the newly formed shallow seas. This was like a planetary-scale fertilizer, supercharging biological cycles and providing the raw materials for an explosion of microbial life. The third piece of the puzzle was a breath of fresh air. The Nuna anomaly also triggered a fundamental shift in the planet's climate and atmosphere. This was driven by a two-pronged geological process. First, as the continents rifted apart, the total length of active volcanic subduction zones, where one tectonic plate dives beneath another, actually decreased. These zones are major sources of atmospheric carbon dioxide. A reduction in these volcanic vents meant less CO2 was being pumped into the atmosphere, leading to a gradual global cooling. At the same time, the creation of vast new mid-ocean ridges, where new oceanic crust is formed, opened up a new way to lock away carbon. Seawater circulated through cracks in this hot, young crust, and chemical reactions stripped carbon from the water, trapping it in minerals on the ocean floor. This dual effect, less CO2 input and more carbon storage, cooled the planet and dramatically altered ocean chemistry. This had a critical side effect. It paved the way for higher concentrations of oxygen. With less atmospheric CO2, and with photosynthetic organisms now supercharged by the flood of nutrients, the balance tipped. More oxygen was being produced, then was being consumed. This led to a significant increase in oxygen levels, particularly in those shallow seas now teeming with new life. Oxygen is high-octane fuel. Aerobic respiration provides far more energy than anaerobic pathways. This energy surplus was the key that would finally unlock the door to greater biological complexity, larger bodies, and active lifestyles like predation. Together, these three things, the creation of shallow seas, the flood of nutrients from eroding mountains, and the rise in atmospheric oxygen, transformed Earth from a stagnant world into a dynamic planet, ready for its next great evolutionary chapter. For the planet's earliest eukaryotes, this was the moment. These organisms already possessed a revolutionary cellular toolkit. They had a nucleus to protect their DNA, internal membranes for complex logistics, and a dynamic cytoskeleton that allowed them to change shape and move. Most critically, they had mitochondria, tiny power plants, once free-living bacteria, that enabled highly efficient aerobic respiration. But this machinery was metabolically expensive. In the low-oxygen, nutrient-poor oceans of the boring billion, simpler was better. Eukaryotes were stuck on the sidelines. But as Nuna's breakup created vast, sunlit, oxygenated, and nutrient-rich shallow seas, the tables turned. The fossil record tells this story. The oldest eukaryotic microfossils date to around 1.6 to 1.8 billion years ago, during Nuna's reign. But for hundreds of millions of years, these fossils show little change, just simple spheres and filaments. Then, coinciding with Nuna's fragmentation, the record explodes with diversity. New shapes and forms appear. We see evidence of multicellular arrangements and organisms with protective plates. Fossils of a red alga called Bangiomorpha pubescens, dated to around 1.2 billion years ago, provide the first clear evidence of complex multicellularity and even sexual reproduction, key innovations for fueling diversification. The rise of algae, in particular, was a pivotal moment. These eukaryotic primary producers were far better equipped to thrive in the new marine environments, leading to a restructuring of marine ecosystems. The influx of phosphorus from the eroding supermountains acted as the trigger. This sudden fertilization of the shallow seas allowed eukaryotic algae to flourish, outcompeting the older cyanobacteria in these expansive new habitats. This algal bloom created a powerful feedback loop. More photosynthesis by these efficient eukaryotes further boosted oxygen levels, creating more hospitable habitats for other complex life. The increased availability of oxygen, in turn, provided the energetic fuel for eukaryotes to finally use their unique toolkit to its full potential. They could support larger genomes, build more complex structures, and sustain more active lifestyles. One of the most significant consequences of this energy revolution was the advent of predation. The flexible cell structure of eukaryotes enabled a new feeding strategy, phagocytosis, the ability to engulf other cells. This led to the emergence of the first microscopic predators, which preyed on bacteria and other eukaryotes. Predation introduced a powerful new selective pressure, driving a co-evolutionary arms race. Prey developed defenses like shells and spines, while predators evolved better hunting strategies. This dynamic is a major engine of diversification, and its appearance in the wake of the Nuna anomaly marks a crucial step towards modern food webs. The once boring world was now a hotbed of evolutionary innovation. The stable, resource-rich, and oxygenated shallow seas, forged by Nuna's breakup, were the perfect cradles for complexity. The echoes of Nuna's dramatic breakup resonate through the deep history of our planet and continue to shape the world we know today. This was not a fleeting episode, but a fundamental reset of Earth's operating system, laying the very foundation for the modern biosphere. The most profound legacy is life itself. The rise of eukaryotes from obscurity to dominance was a direct result of these new environments. The innovations of multicellularity, sexual reproduction, and predation, all born in these Proterozoic seas, were the essential prologue to the Cambrian explosion hundreds of millions of years later, when animal life spectacularly radiated. Every animal, plant, and fungus on Earth today traces its ancestry back to those pioneers that seized the opportunities presented by the Nuna anomaly. The geological legacy is also etched into our planet. The increase in atmospheric oxygen, driven by geology and biology working in concert, was a pivotal step towards the air we depend on. The erosion of Nuna's supermountains did more than just fertilize the oceans. It also concentrated vast mineral wealth. The sediments washed away from these peaks created some of the world's most significant deposits of iron, gold, and other minerals that we mine today. The story of the Nuna anomaly is a powerful testament to the inseparable dance between geology and biology. It shows that life does not evolve in a vacuum. The slow, inexorable movements of tectonic plates and the rise and fall of mountains can act as powerful evolutionary catalysts. The boring billion wasn't boring. It was a period of immense potential, a coiled spring of biological innovation held in check by a stagnant world. The breakup of Nuna was the trigger that released that spring, propelling life towards the complexity that defines our world. The ghost of this lost supercontinent is all around us, in the air we breathe, the minerals we use, and the very cells of our bodies. The Nuna anomaly was the crucible in which the modern world was forged.